some seat of honor. What kind of sick crap is that? It's crazy. Hey guys, welcome back. If you are new here, hi, my name is Shayna, and in my little corner of the internet, we talk about spooky history of all kinds. If that sounds like something you're interested in, be sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell because I am here for you every Wednesday. Last week, my mom and I did my first vlog ever. It was kind of me preparing myself for my vacation that I'm gonna be vlogging, and if you missed it, I'll be sure to link it up here for you. So I'll stop jabbing and let's get into it. Today, we will be talking about America's first family serial killers. And this happened pretty close to where I live. I've mentioned this before where when I'm on my way to work or home, I listen to this podcast called Lore by Aaron Mahnke. My husband actually got me into it and it's really good. He tells stories about our history and he also dives into other cultures and what they believe in and a lot of the stories they tell. So it's actually really interesting. It's right up my alley. But I usually listen to it on Pandora because it's free, but I'll try to link the website down below in case you are interested in listening to it. It's just something I and my husband enjoy doing, so I figured you'd like it too since you watch my videos. But anyways, I've heard this serial killer story many years ago, but I forgot about it until Aaron Mahnke was talking about it on Lore, and I was like, oh yeah, I was like, that would be such a good video to make. So here I am. I did some research, looked into it a little bit, and I figured I'd just tell you the story. So let's talk about the Bloody Benders. In Labette County, Kansas in 1873 is when a family would be given the name the Bloody Benders and were known as America's first serial killers. After the Civil War, the Osage Indians were moved from Labette County, Kansas down to Oklahoma. And they did this so the Kansas Territory would be available to European settlers at the time. Not very nice, I know, but it's part of our history. In October of 1870, 5 families moved to this area and ended up settling around 7 miles from where the city Cherryvale would be. And one of these families were the Benders. They moved onto a property that was 160 acres that faced the Osage Trail. The men of the family were the first to arrive, and that was John Bender Sr. and John Bender Jr., and they were thought to be German immigrants. Now, John Sr. was around the age of 60, they believe, and he spoke very little English, and he had a very thick accent. And John Jr. was thought to be around 25, and he spoke pretty good English, but still he had a little accent. He was known to laugh aimlessly, which made people think he was kind of crazy, you know, like he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. Now in 1871, when the men were done building their cabin and barn, is when the women would come. There was Elvira Bender, and she was about 55 at this time, and she went by Ma. She spoke very little English as well and was also not very friendly with the neighbors. Their neighbors actually ended up nicknaming her the She-Devil. If they only knew how appropriate that name was for her. I mean, really appropriate. We'll get into that. Now, the most popular of the family was Kate. She was known to be a very attractive 23-year-old who spoke English fluently and worked as a self-proclaimed healer and psychic. She claimed to be able to cure illnesses and would often give lectures on spiritualism. Now, at the time, occultism was not very unusual because people were interested in talking to their relatives who had passed on, so people who did this were not really frowned upon as much. This really depends. It was becoming popular at this time. Now the family had used a canvas or just like a curtain to split the 1-room cabin into 2 rooms. The back of the cabin was their living quarters. That's where they slept, relaxed, all that stuff. The front of the cabin they turned into a general store. It had a kitchen and a dining table, and travelers could come by and stop for food. Were able to pick up some dry goods. They would cook them a home-cooked meal. They would even let them sleep there if they wanted. That was when they called it the Bender Inn, and unfortunately that's not at all what it appeared to be. The murders that we know of started in 1871 when a man was found in Drum Creek just southeast of the Bender Bender property in what is now called Montgomery County. His skull was crushed and his throat was slashed. And then in February of 1872, 2 more men were found with the same unusual injuries. Then by the fall of that same year, travelers would just randomly disappear off the Osage Trail. Back then, it was really dangerous to travel because they were traveling in their carriages with horses, and it was really common for burglars, thieves, murderers to just hide in the woods and attack whoever came along the trail. So this wasn't really unusual in the beginning, but what was making it unusual is that too many travelers were disappearing off the Osage Trail, so they knew something had to be up. And reports of the missing and murdered people just started to spread throughout the region. It caused travelers to avoid that route completely, which is honestly what probably saved their lives. Now, people in that area were trying to find whoever the culprit was. They were trying a little too hard and just starting to blame innocent people, but they were just scared. They wanted to stop the bloodshed, which is understandable, I get it. What really made the investigation become even more serious was when a well-known reporter named George Newton Longcore, also known as Launcher or Launcher, disappeared. And this disappearance is what really kind of set things in motion for the upcoming events that would eventually expose the truth about these disappearances and deaths. After the death of Longcore's wife, him and his 18-month-old daughter, Mary Ann, left Independence, Kansas for Iowa, but never made it. It was soon after that, Dr. William Henry York, which was Longcore's former neighbor and friend, was alerted that the wagon and horses he sold Longcore were found abandoned near Fort Scott, Kansas. So Dr. York decided that he was going to go and look for Longcore and his daughter in the spring of 1873. He questioned people along the trail as he made his way to Fort Scott, Kansas. He then came across the abandoned wagon and horses that were Longcore's. Now, he was able to tell that they were Longcore's because he recognized the belongings that were in the wagon. Now, on his way back to Independence, he decided he was going to stop at none other than the Bender Inn, and Dr. York never returned home. But by killing Dr. York, the Bender family made a huge mistake. Because believe it or not, Dr. York was part of a very prominent family. His 2 brothers were Colonel Ed York and Alexander M. York, who was a member of the Kansas State Senate. Wowza, did they make a big mistake. After realizing that their brother was missing, Colonel York decided he was going to organize a search party of 75 men. They searched the areas that Dr. York was last seen and eventually made their way to the Bender Inn in March of 1873. And when they first got to the Bender Inn, the Bender family denied ever seeing Dr. York. In fact, they decided to help with the investigation and give some suggestions on what they thought could have happened to Dr. York. They suggested that the traveler may have met with foul play at a remote location near Drum Creek, where John Jr. had been claimed to have been shot at around the same time Dr. York disappeared. How strange. But unfortunately, without any proof that the Bender family was involved at all, Colonel York had no choice but to leave and move on. But I'm sure being there, talking to them, that must have given him like some sort of pit in the stomach, because he didn't give up. He knew something fishy was going on, but he just couldn't prove it. I couldn't imagine being in that type of situation. That must have been awful. Later, Colonel York found some evidence against the Benders and ended up returning on April 3rd with some armed men. Colonel York confronted them about a woman who claimed to have fled the Bender Inn after Elvira threatened them with knives and pistols.
It's the she-devil.
Though Elvira pretended to not be able to speak English, she started shouting at Colonel and his men about how the woman cursed her coffee. Then she proceeded to kick the men out of the inn.
Well, she-devil, you're talking perfect English now.
And I bet her revealing that she could, in fact, understand and talk English just helped Colonel York establish his beliefs that they were involved in his brother's disappearance, because they were all liars. Now, hoping to kind of calm everyone down and move past these crazy accusations, Kate offered her psychic abilities to assist Colonel York in finding his brother for the low price, $500. Which is equivalent to $10,000 today.
Honestly, Kate, how is that helping the situation?
He denied the offer and was still persistent that they were involved in the disappearance. So Kate ended up telling the colonel if he came back that Friday night with not as many men, that she would show him Dr. York's grave. Now, about the same time this was all happening, the neighboring communities started to blame the Osage Indians for the disappearances, saying they were the reason so many people were disappearing off the trail. It had to be them, right? Again, terrible thing to do, but it happened. Local towns ended up having a meeting in the Harmony Grove schoolhouse to try to address and solve the Osage problem. And the community decided to obtain search warrants for every single piece of property that was between Big Hill Creek and Drum Creek. It was just a few days later that the local people started noticing the animals on the Bender property were starving or dead. And they elected the township officer at the time, who was Leroy Dick, to go and check out the cabin and barn to, see what was going on. Well, when he went, he noticed that the entire Bender property was completely abandoned, and it appeared that they left in a hurry. They went into the cabin and discovered that there was a trap door that was under one of the beds, and they said there was a very foul smell coming from it. They ended up having a search party come and search the property, but I don't think they were all really prepared for what they found. Underneath the trap door, they found out that it did stink in there, but there was no bodies, just blood-soaked stone floor. I know, being a farmer and everything, they were kind of wondering, well, maybe they butchered animals down there, but it wasn't really common for farmers to butcher their animals in the cellar. It was a possibility they were looking into because they didn't see any bodies. So at that point, they weren't sure. They just knew it smelled like death. So they were at a loss. Now, someone from the search party decided they were going to take a break. I don't know who it was. I don't remember. It didn't really say. It could have been the colonel. They decided that they were going to go and sit in their wagon, take a breather, maybe have a drink of water, and just relax until they continue searching, because they searched everywhere and they weren't finding anything. So as he goes to the wagon, he sits up in the front, which is pretty high. Wagons kind of sat pretty high. And that was whenever he looked over at Elvira and Kate's vegetable garden. And he was able to see that there were little, what looked like dirt piles that were the same length and width of bodies. They looked like little bitty graves all over the vegetable garden, and nobody would have noticed this unless they were sitting up higher like he was. So I found that pretty interesting. They ended up finding Dr. York's body in a very shallow grave. By the next day, they were able to discover at least 10 bodies, along with additional dismembered body parts. The victims appeared to be hit in the head by what appeared to be a hammer, and then their throats were slit. All of the bodies had the same injuries except for the 18-month-old Marianne. They believe she was buried alive, which just makes my heart hurt hearing that. Anyone who is capable of hurting an innocent child, in my opinion, is nutso. No normal human being, in my opinion, could do that. No one who is right in their head could do that. Many of the bodies were indecently mutilated, which possibly suggests that they were mutilated in the genital area. Not good. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, how in the world were they able to pull this off for so long? How did they plan the murders out? Well, here are some statements of some people who survived the Bender family. It's believed that the guests were given the seat of honor at the dining table, which would have the victims backed up against the curtain. So let's say this is the curtain. My background is the curtain. They would be sitting here at the dining room table. Some of them said that they were so close to the curtain, it was like their head was literally touching the curtain. That's how close they were. And the spot they were sitting was conveniently placed right next to the trap door that led to the cellar. So once the victim was sitting at the dining room table, eating their food, either Bender Sr. or Bender Jr. would hide behind the curtain and hit them with a hammer. And then one of the women would then slit the throat of the victim to make sure that they were dead. Then the body would conveniently be thrown down the trap door, stripped of their belongings, and later either buried or dismembered. Some seat of honor. What kind of sick crap is that? It's crazy. Honestly, it reminds me of the movie Sweeney Todd. You know, they're sitting in his barber chair, shaving them, and if they're an enemy, he slits their throat and then releases the trap and they just fall down the trap door, so no mess. Some seriously messed up stuff, let me tell ya. The lack of targets really suggests that the Bender family just kind of killed for the fun of it. Now, there were around a dozen bullet holes found in the cabin, which to investigators suggests that the victims did try to fight back. Investigators found many items that were left behind from the Bender family, and one of them was a Bible that was identified as John Jr.'s, but it's wrote in German and it had notes in it that states that John Jr. was actually John Gebhardt. Now, neighbors that lived near the Bender Inn kind of were suspicious about John Jr. and Kate, and that they might have been a couple instead of brother and sister. And it is now believed that none of the Bender family were actually Benders at all, and that only the mother and daughter were really related. So they were probably the masterminds of the whole thing, wouldn't you say? Elvira was thought to be born as Elmira Mark in the Adirondack Mountains. I'll put the name on the screen because I don't know how to pronounce it. And she had multiple children and husbands, which some believe died of head injuries. Coincidence?
I think not.
Now, John Sr. was likely born as John Flickinger, and Kate was Eliza's fifth child, named Eliza Griffith. After the discoveries of all the bodies on the Bender's property, both State Senator Alexander York and Kansas Governor Thomas Osborne offered substantial rewards for the capture of the Bender family. Now, detectives followed the wagon's tracks and found the family's horses and wagon abandoned about 12 miles north of the inn. Now, from here, it's really hard to determine what really happened and what's an urban legend, because this happened over 150 years ago. So some believe that John Jr. and Kate traveled by railroad to the outlaw colony near the border of Texas and New Mexico. Meanwhile, other reports suggest that Ma and Pa Bender ended up in St. Louis, Missouri. Now, many years after the crimes took place, two women who were traveling together were accused of being Kate and Elvira Bender, but several vigilante groups claimed to have killed the Bender family, but none of them could provide proof so that they could collect that reward that was being given. Now, in 1884, an elderly man who met the description of Paul Bender was arrested for killing a man, and you'll never guess how. With a hammer.
Dun dun dun.
Now, while he was in jail, he was attempting to escape, and he ended up severing his foot, which caused him to bleed to death. So there goes that. Now, later in 1889, a mother named Elmira and her daughter named Sarah Elizabeth were arrested for larceny in Michigan, and they were accused of being Elvira and Kate Bender. But when they were brought to Kansas, no one could prove that they were Elvira or Kate. So no one really knows if any of the Bender family were ever caught and punished at all, whether it was for the crimes that they committed when they had the Bender Inn, or if they were caught and punished for other crimes that they may have committed that we just don't know about. So just a super crazy story. But let me know what you guys all think in the comments below, and if you've heard of anything about the Benders that I just happened to not mention in the video, because I would really like to know some more info. But that's it for me today, guys. I hope you guys found this story really fascinating or interesting. If you guys did like it, be sure to give me a like, and don't forget to subscribe, because I am here for you every Wednesday at 10 a.m. I can't believe I have been uploading videos for half a year now. It does not feel like it's been that long. This year has just blown by, but I hope you guys enjoy the content nonetheless. I'm happy you all are here. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.